So the previous set of stories was a sort of time travel, if you will, from the ancient past of the Game Boys and WOPs into the modern teams and sort of modern set of problems. And as Lasse said, the context has changed quite a lot. The companies are different, the games are different than they used to be. And one interesting thing that happened recently was that Next Games was acquired by Netflix. That's a big deal. And now we're talking about a big global sort of US-based corporation from a different industry with a very strong culture. They literally wrote the book on the culture. So what happens when a big international corporation buys a big Finnish corporation, but relative differences are quite huge? What's happening on the inside? What's the result? Is it violent conflict or maybe not? This and a lot more, our man on the inside who's going to be telling the tale is none other than Joonas Laakso, the Chief People Officer of Next Games. Take it away.
Thank you, Teemu. Very good to see everybody. I woke up today not realizing I'm doing this live, so had to rush off to the office to find a clean company shirt and what have you. We have a fresh puppy, so all of my company hoodies are, drooled and chewed. So that was a bit of an issue. I'm very happy to be doing this live. I haven't spoken to people in about 2 years, barring our internal stuff. So very exciting stuff. My name is Joonas Laakso. I'm indeed the Chief People Officer at Next Games. I have a weird background, so I'm now in HR, and I come here from production. So I started in games in 2008 when I was 30 years old, and I joined Bugbear to work on PS3, Xbox 360, and PC driving games at the time as a producer. I did that for quite a while, and then made the switch to mobile. I had seen our publisher at the time, Namco Bandai, playing Puzzle & Dragons, absolutely obsessed, like these old Japanese guys. I could not put their phones down, like for our meetings in Helsinki, which like told me like, okay, like I have no idea what's going on there, but that's something I need to get in on. And I made the decision to then move to free-to-play in that meeting in Helsinki, in Vallila. And I did that, and through Remedy, I came to Next Games. And I've been with Next Games since 2015, so quite a while. I started as a production lead here and moved on to executive producer, like Lasse did just now, and then made the switch to HR on the week when Finland went into lockdown with the pandemic in 2020. My father said at the time that, well, like if you're going to make a jump to a new discipline, like this is probably a great time because nobody knows how this whole pandemic thing is going to play out. And I think he was right. So like I didn't know what to do, but neither did anybody else. So I feel like I got a pretty level playing field at the time. But now I have been focused solely on HR stuff, culture stuff for the duration of the pandemic and the time since. And indeed, the acquisition by Netflix this year has presented us with a bunch of like very cultural, topical issues and situations, but like also a background in general. And that's what I'm gonna go through here. So like what has Next Games gone through, and then this is not working. There we go. So what we're going to go through, can I get my slides to show up here? Are the company background, so you have a bit of context. Then the cultural timeline. So the Next Games has gone through 5 distinct phases culturally. So I'll go through each and cover like what kinds of challenges they've set up. And then we're going to go into issues and solutions that I feel we've stumbled upon. And then finally, lessons learned. Still can't see myself here. Hi, we are Next Games. So these days a Netflix game studio. Next Games is a Finnish game studio. So we started independent in 2013. We are 134 people as of last week from 31 nationalities, which is something that we remain very proud of. Like we have been talking to our new corporate owners at Netflix who are like, they come here and they look around and they're saying, well, like you don't look like a very diverse bunch. Like these are Californians, so they are used to a demographic that looks very different from us. But like they don't have 31 nationalities working in the same office. We are working in 4 countries in Europe, so Finland, Spain, UK, and Estonia. We have quite a few people in Spain now, which is something that really works these days. Next Games develops mobile games based on global entertainment brands. It's what we've done from day one and what we continue to do these days. And you might know us from our Walking Dead titles. We've released 2 Walking Dead games, and by our latest release, Stranger Things Puzzle Tales, which is due to come out on the Netflix platform quite shortly. And indeed, this year we got acquired by Netflix, so we are now a Netflix game studio. So these 5 stages that I mentioned, I feel like as a company we have grown through these, and as it happens, I have been here for all of those. So I joined in 2015 to help ship the Walking Dead No Man's Land, and at that time we had been around for 2 years, so set up as an independent studio in 2013. Right before I started, we had acquired another game studio, Helsinki Gameworks, in 2014, and obviously that has presented us with some cultural challenges, which we will go into in a bit. And then indeed the following year, a team comprised mostly of this Helsinki Gameworks team shipped The Walking Dead No Man's Land, which is a game that is still around and still making money. We continue to be quite proud of that. And the same year, we released our first game, Compass Point West, which was a Western-themed RTS title. No Man's Land, if you haven't played it, is a turn-based tactics game, RPG, and very good in that genre. Then, in 2017, so a couple of years after the release of the first Walking Dead game, we were the first Finnish game company to be listed on the stock exchange on Nasdaq First North. The same year, we acquired another game company, Lume Games, who were at the time like one of the leading companies on location-based and AR titles. And we needed that expertise to ship our next game, which was The Walking Dead Our World, a location-based added reality shooter. And that came out in 2018. Then in 2020, the pandemic hit. Obviously, we had to adjust to that, like everybody else here. I'll go into the challenges from a cultural perspective in a bit. And then the following year, so last year, we shipped the Stranger Things Puzzle Tales, which is a match RPG that we very recently took down from the app stores in order to release it on the Netflix platform shortly. And then indeed this year happened the Netflix acquisition, which I see as a separate stage before being a Netflix studio, which is what we are today. So the first stage being the independent studio. So the key here is that we have always had a mission that the whole company aligns behind. And that mission has always been that we wanted to make these great games based on the world's most popular entertainment properties, so the biggest entertainment brands. Like we picked Walking Dead at the time because the company leadership at the time asked themselves, like, what is the biggest thing on TV? And it was by a very long shot The Walking Dead. And we just decided to go for it and got the license and made a very successful game based on that. And we have basically continued on that mission ever since. Yes, we did have that one own IP in the beginning with Compass Point West, but ever since then it's been licensed titles with the very biggest brands. And I really feel like our whole story, up to and including the Netflix acquisition, has been following this very same path. And I think it's given us a cultural backbone that everybody really aligns with. And we see this in talent acquisition, so hiring people. So like when we ask people, like, why did you apply with Next Games, I would say that the most common answer is that they wanted to work on these big entertainment brands, big Hollywood brands, and that's what sets us apart. And that is a unifying thing for the people working for us. Probably not everybody, but the vast majority of us. And that keeping coming up, like when you talk to people, like even after they've joined, is something that tells me that the mission is really working. And to me, you really need something like that you're holding on to, like through all the changes that are invariably going to come your way. The other really big thing that we have is our values. So the team leadership at the time established 3 key values for Next Games, being courage, caring, and curiosity. And we've stuck to those all through these years. Like, we have revisited them a number of times. I would say approximately annually. I don't think we've done it during the pandemic, but before that. And we've always decided that, yes, they still continue to serve us well. Like, we've been open to rewriting them. We've been open to, defining them in different ways, or like coming up with completely new values. But we always ultimately decided that, no, these still serve us really well. And that is along with the mission. Like, I feel like if you have your mission and your values, then you're off to a very strong start. If you don't have these 2 things, I think you're going to be running into some very difficult waters in a cultural way. If you don't have a mission, if you don't have values, like, get started on those. You can't do it too early. Like, again, Next Games did not have games like when these 2 things were defined. And yeah, do hold on to your mission and your values. Then indeed, like in managing like all of this cultural change, it helps that we now have past experience from embracing different corporate cultures. So I already mentioned Helsinki Gameworks and Lume Games acquisitions, and these 2 played out quite differently. With Helsinki Gameworks, we basically just needed another game team to work on No Man's Land in order to ship that in time. So that entire company was inserted into Next Games, and if I remember correctly, all of them worked on No Man's Land. And they basically did that as a unit, and Next Games like just added 1 or 2 people on top of that. This wasn't a great approach in retrospect. The team became very siloed, and that resulted in a lot of friction. It was very difficult to bring these 2 cultures together because I kind of feel like we didn't even try. So we let that one team do its own thing. Like, as the new production lead in that team, I wasn't even told that this is a company that has been very recently acquired. I was just confused about like this ongoing friction between this one team and everybody else. And obviously, like, when I learned that this is the background, that it's actually a separate company, that it continues to work together, siloed from the rest of the company. Yeah, obviously, like, all of those issues then started to make sense. So yeah, maybe don't do that. With Lume Games, it was much easier because they had this very specific expertise that we needed for building our new game. So everybody could see that the value add is way beyond like just adding, hands-on keyboards. But instead, like, we are welcoming them for their expertise, that they know something that we don't, that we need to build this game. And then the other big thing there was that the Our World team building the new game with Lume Games wasn't just Lume Games. It was a much more balanced mix of people from both companies. And yeah, that worked a lot better. So silos bad, bringing everybody together like on a shared purpose with a clear understanding of like why are you bringing these new people on board makes a lot more sense. And certainly these are lessons that we have returned to in our own acquisition into Netflix. Stage 2, being a listed company. So, being listed on the stock exchange generally means that you have more money, more responsibilities, way more structure. And that means that we had to add more admin staff, more processes, more publications, communications, what have you. And we kind of had this blue-eyed approach that maybe like the way that we build games doesn't really need to change. Like, this is all like just corporate stuff that is happening on the side, and games can be going on here. And it didn't really work. We should have been focusing on the game building a lot more. Like, I feel like I served on the management team for a bit during that time, even though I stepped out at a later point. I feel like we focused too much on the whole corporate thing because we had to. Like being a listed company, it just requires a lot of corporate stuff to be built and managed. And we let the game building sort of coast. Like we did not bring on like a creative into the management team. I feel well, like we should have, like just to make sure that we retain that share of mind at all times. Like that has been remedied now, but it took us for a very long time. And like Lasse was saying, people working on the money and the business are probably not the best people to be making the calls on the games, which is not a purely creative endeavor, but certainly compared to the things that are going on because of being a listed company, it's very creative. And yeah, this whole mismatch wasn't great for our games. So the teams were more or less left to coast, which led to no end of problems in making new games. Then we had consultations, the YT-menettely in Finnish. The launch of our world was not a success. We had massive technical issues, like on launch day, ridiculous amount of traffic. Meeting these technical problems meant that we lost a ton of very expensive players, and were basically running out of money fast. And when we righted the ship, we realized that we have got to cut some people to be able to cope with these costs. So then we did that. Ultimately, we didn't have to lay off a ton of people, but like any is pretty bad for the culture. And if you're not familiar with the consultations proceedings, it introduces this weeks-long period when like nobody in the company knows if their jobs are secure, like unless you're able to limit it to a very specific function. But in this case, we couldn't. So the consultations basically applied to everybody. And that means that your best and brightest are going to start applying for new jobs immediately because they're not sure what's going to happen, and that's really, really bad. And I really feel like the process left us in a very fragile state for years after. So even though like the majority of our staff these days, they were not with us like during this time, I feel like it's still a thing that haunts us to this day. And especially like when we were struggling to get new games going, the only thing sort of that people were focusing on was this uncertainty. So that's not great. You need something positive to be focusing on. And in hindsight, we should have forced that, like come hell or high water, like just get something positive going instead of focusing on this thing. But we didn't at the time because we had other things to worry about, like staying afloat. Then we did manage to get through that. We were working on new games, things were looking up again, and then the global pandemic hit. So obviously we had been discussing about working remotely for a long time. Like, your programmers are probably the people in your studios that pre-pandemic were talking most about, like the opportunity to maybe work off-site for X days a week because they can concentrate better there and what have you. And like we had been thinking about it, and basically we hadn't established any hard and fast rules, so people could be offsite if they felt like there was cause for it. We did have some rules at the time, like we strongly encouraged people to be at the office to begin and end the weeks on Mondays and Fridays. Otherwise, we didn't really care. But like ultimately, like just before, the week before Finland went into lockdown, we decided that we were just going to go fully remote to be ahead of this, and basically made the switch overnight. And as I'm sure that basically everybody here realized that it wasn't such a big deal. Like it worked really well. It took us less than 2 weeks to get everybody their desk set up at their homes or whatever they preferred. And teams really seamlessly shifted over to working remotely. It wasn't really an issue. And we see so many benefits that we don't really think we're going back. So these days, like on a normal day, you get maybe 20 people at the office. If we have something shared going on, maybe 50. And I don't really see that changing to a massive effect. So feels like remote is the default for most people, and you can't really argue with benefits. Like I save 2 hours per day because I don't have the commute, so that's pretty massive to me. So I only go to office when I have to, and this is what we're seeing in the other companies as well, and also with Netflix. And obviously this has had a big impact, and we'll talk about the effects of that in a bit. Then we have hired a lot of people during the pandemic because, again, like we found our way again. We felt like we have direction. We know what we're doing. We need more hands on deck to get all of these things done. And at some point, we realized that like half the company has joined during the pandemic, and like most of them have never met their colleagues, like until the summer party we had a month ago or something. And that's like a really weird thing to realize, that like you have so many people working for you that have never met their teams, that you have never seen. Like you don't really get to know people like in work calls. You need more than that, and it's like from a cultural point of view, it's a very dangerous place to be in. And this whole bringing people on board during the pandemic, in worst cases, moving to Finland during the pandemic, so like they don't even get to meet other Finnish people like during the lockdown. Like obviously that's now easier, but that was a tough year and a half or so. It has created a ton of pressure on our onboarding and team integrations that I don't really feel that we have been able to resolve yet. So that is going to continue to require more attention for reasons that I'm going to go into in just a bit. So trust and remote working is, I really feel, the big topic here. So like when we started remote working, we were very aware that this is likely going to create some issues that we are not perceiving in advance. So we were paying a lot of attention to like how people are doing. We're working very closely with our healthcare to make sure that like we're not overlooking some critical issue here. But it really looked like that the teams are doing really well. Like no team was reporting like any sort of like decrease in efficiency or indeed well-being. Like everything seemed to be really good. I don't want to overlook the issues like of a handful of people. Like some people had it really hard. Like they could not cope with the loneliness and so forth. But like if you're looking at the company level, it really didn't seem to be an issue until about a year, 18 months into the pandemic. And then the issues really started to come up. And what we're seeing is that it is really hurting belonging and trust. Belonging is bad. So if people don't feel like they belong, they're not going to be very attached to your company. And you really do want everybody to feel like they belong. So if they belong, then they are going to be sharing their best ideas. If they don't feel like they belong, then they're simply not. Like they'll be there to do the work, but you won't get their best out of them. They won't be feeling good about coming to work with you. And if you don't have belonging, then you're not going to be able to build trust. And without trust, creative can't happen. It's as simple as that. Like trust has to come first. And if you don't know people that you're working with, you have never seen them, you've never had lunch with them, like it is very hard to trust them. Like maybe if you're very senior and you understand the situation that everybody's going through, maybe it's easier for you then. But especially for more junior people or like people who have just recently migrated to Finland to work for us, it's an extremely challenging setup. And again, it took like more than a year for these issues to start coming up. But when they did, we realized that we need to start doing something about this. And how do we know? It is because we run this extensive weekly pulse surveys. So my team sends out a questionnaire every week where we have a battery of about 40 questions, I think, and we choose between 2 and 4 each week to be sent to everybody on our payroll. And then they answer those, and then we look at trends over time to see where the company is going and where the issues are. And we can look at that by manager, by team, by tenure, and what have you. And we do. So like my team obviously goes through the results, but we also, the management reviews them monthly, and the teams can look at their own results every week and then discuss if there's anything that looks off. And we use this as an early warning system or like smoke signal that like if you're seeing red in the results, it means that there's probably like something something that needs attention, and your team should be talking about it. There are many ways of doing this. We like this tool called LeapSum. So then the fourth stage being the Netflix acquisition. So obviously this was a long process. So me and the rest of management worked on this from, I want to say sometime in September, maybe last year, until it became known to the company sometime in spring this year. So we had to keep it a secret for a very long time, despite working very long hours on getting all the information together. This created a situation where slowly our teams were starting to realize that something is up. Like, Joonas, what are you not telling us? To which I could only reply that I can't tell you. To which invariably they would reply, okay, are we going out of business? To which I could reply that no, I think I can say no, but that's about it. But that wasn't great for at least for my mental health. So being able to talk about it was much better. But the secrecy can't have helped the culture in general. And then when you do tell the company that, hey, okay, now it looks like this is happening, Netflix is indeed acquiring us. Like, when we tell the news, we don't really have any details. Like, it's on the level that, okay, this massive global entertainment company with 10,000 plus employees is buying us. We're going to become a tiny cog in that machine. And then obviously people have a ton of questions and we have no answers at that point. So it creates a period of excessive uncertainty that you need to break out of as fast as you can. And initially I kind of thought that it helps that the Netflix culture is quite widely known in the tech industry. It's been written about a lot. People talk about it a lot. There's numerous books about it. There are so many podcast interviews, what have you, about it, studies. So people can get familiar with it in advance and figure out what does it mean for them. And I thought that this would help us. But in the end, I'm not sure, because we took this hands-off approach where we did not want to dictate that, okay, here's the cultural book, you read it, you become it, and then off you go. We did not want to do that. Instead, we let people to find out things on their own and let them develop at an organic pace. And that probably wasn't a great idea. I'm not sure if realistically we could have really done anything else. Netflix is also new to acquiring businesses. They don't do that every day. The whole game setup is quite new to them. And the whole games organization is a small part of the massive Netflix thing. So there's a lot of these uncertain moving parts here, which did not make it easy for our staff. And we did take the approach of letting things develop naturally, see where it takes us. I strongly felt that our highest performers within our staff would just take the Netflix culture and apply the bits that make sense and run with it and achieve great results in short time. But in reality, I feel like we've got into quite a bit of confusion in this time. So indeed, the last sentence there. So in retrospect, we really should have said that, okay, this is how we would like you to think about the Netflix culture. And then if half a year in, we discovered that was a bad idea, then we should have just corrected that course and not let people try to find their own way. So finally, stage 5, next games, a Netflix game studio. So I feel like we are now through this acquisition phase. We are now operating as part of Netflix. And the key here is to understand that it is a journey. So we must adapt our ways of working, and Netflix also has to adapt their ways of working and their expectations. They're a big, primarily Californian company, especially the games part of it, even though it's global like the entire Netflix organization these days. So they have to adapt to European ways of working and thinking, and we have to adapt to Californian ways of working and thinking. And in order to get here, what we did with the management team and with my HR team was that we sat down and we looked at the building blocks of the Netflix culture. So again, like from these bunch of books and what have you. And then we looked at the Next Games building blocks. So our mission, our values, and then just, free form, let's ask people like what they feel is important in the Next Games culture. We went as far as asking the staff, what should we keep? What should we change? What should we add from the Netflix culture? So like, what are people excited about? What are they afraid about? And like there were no surprises in this. Like the human psychology is quite straightforward in this sort of situation. People want clarity. They want to understand what is their role in the future. How does any of this apply to their day-to-day? And like it is your job, like in leadership, to then provide those answers, or at least guidance on like, okay, this is how I'm approaching it, and this is how it might apply to you. And like when we started this comparison thing, like here is the Netflix building blocks, here are the Next Games building blocks. We really assumed that there would be a lot of like massive philosophical issues that we would have to navigate. But in the end, there really aren't any. There are differences in ways of working. There are differences in communication for sure, like maybe the big one between Finnish ways of working and California ways of working is communication. But in terms of like how do like experts at the top of their game, like how do they work together? How would they like to work? That's pretty universal. Like experts are greatly motivated by the same things. So yes, there are some differences in primarily communication. How do people take to leadership? What does authority look like? How does decision making work? But like the things that people need to be excellent in their work, so like the kinds of information they need, the freedom, the responsibility that they need, all of that is pretty universal, we're finding. And this has now become mostly an exercise of like understanding the language of the other parties. So like what do they call this thing that's important to us, and vice versa. And the other big thing to understand, and also to get your staff to understand, is that there is no moment like when we have become Netflix. I don't think we ever will. We are Next Games, a Netflix game studio. So like over time, like maybe a year in from this point, there will become a point like when we realize that, okay, like maybe there's no more like substantial change going on. Like we are now as aligned as we're going to be. And like this is what Next Games is now as part of this bigger thing. And I think that the staff may be looking for that singular point, like when have we become Netflix? What is the goal? What is the schedule there? But there can't really be a schedule. It's never going to work like that. Culture is far too nebulous because it's in the ways that we treat each other. It's how we work together. So it's formed on a daily basis. You can't just come in and ordain that this is going to be the culture, starting from January 1st. And in like retaining our own culture, our own being, it really helps that we are, on another continent. The 10-hour time difference is not great for our evening calls. That has been a challenge, but it does shield us. Like Netflix people can't just decide that they would like to visit Helsinki. It's a bit of a challenge to get here, and vice versa. So like that helps. We're going to retain more of our own thing just by virtue of the physical separation. And also indeed hanging on to our own ways of working. Like Netflix doesn't come in to say that this is how you need to work. Rather it's understanding how we work, and then finding those common touch points on like, okay, how do we release games together? So then, like after these 5 stages of the Next Games cultural growth, the underlying issues that we have kept running into from my perspective are, so things to watch out for, and I think that these are pretty universal. First of all, uncertainty, I'm sure has come up quite a few times now. It really is a culture killer. So if people don't know like what's expected from them, if they don't know how they're supposed to treat each other, if they don't know like what their colleague is working towards, that mission, and how they're gonna go about it, the values, you're not gonna have a great culture, because people are going to be uncertain, and uncertain people are afraid. They play it safe. It is extremely difficult to get creative in that kind of atmosphere. You need to build a culture of trust. And you cannot force culture. So like even if your title is Chief People Officer, you can't come in and tell people that this is how you're going to work together, this is what you think, this is how you're going to, see this Netflix acquisition. Rather, you're going to have to be sure that you're as clear as you can be and that you're setting example, and then make sure that everybody is playing along the same playbook, essentially. So if you're looking at culture as ways of working, then a lot of that comes down to how are you working? Like, are you setting the example that you want to be seeing in others? It's in the shared behavior. So like, yes, you can define values, but then you have to, live those values. Like we have this practice that on Fridays we thank each other, and we strongly encourage that when doing so publicly, you would cite the values that you're seeing being exhibited. People take to that really well, and they seem to be really putting thought into thinking about the values in that context. And I think it really helps in grounding these into people's everyday behavior. And if you're in a leadership position, you really need to understand that your primary tools in building culture are hiring, rewarding, and firing. So like, who are the people you hire? Like that says a ton about your culture, like way more like how you, write your emails and how you dictate work for others. Who do you reward? Says probably more about your culture than anything else. So like, if you're rewarding the kinds of behavior that you don't want to see in your culture, like what are you even doing as a leader? You need to be on top of that. And ultimately, like who are you firing? So like on what grounds are you letting people go? Like what is the reasoning there? And again, that says a ton about who you are as a company. Some more things to be careful about. So culture is not static. It cannot be. So even if you write a culture handbook and it's like 100 pages, it's written this week, it's simply not going to apply to everything that is going on in your company, even today, let alone next week, let alone next month, next year, what have you. Culture is always changing. So every single new employee that comes in changes the culture. You can't fight that, and you shouldn't. So you need to understand that the culture is always changing, and instead of like trying to stop it from changing, you should be aware of like where is it going, and then guiding that to the best of your ability. And again, the biggest drivers of this change are your new people coming in, people being rewarded, people being let go. How are these things affecting your culture? You have to be very aware of that. People have different roles in the company culture, and like some people are very visible in the overall culture, some less so, and you need to understand like the roles people play there. And like even more so, you should understand that culture is because it's people. It's the way that we behave together, how we apply ourselves at work. It cannot be static. So if you try to force it to become static, you will kill it. Like static life is dead. You don't want dead. So go for life, go for change, and embrace that. I'm sure that there is a remote team somewhere who is going to tell me that this is absolutely not the case. And yes, you can get around these, but I'm saying that as a company of 134 people working primarily in Helsinki, but across Europe, we are starting to struggle with people not connecting with their remote teammates, and we're seeing that belonging is starting to hurt, like in the way that people feel about the company and their colleagues. And we haven't really found a way to counteract all of this. We're trying to be as decisive as we can. My primary tool right now is enabling our teams to like, hey, you need to be aware of this and make sure that you're including your remote teammates as much as anybody local. It really helps that all of the teams are still currently hybrid. So like there is no case where the bulk of the team would be on site and then we would have only 1 or 2 people remote. But I'm sure that we will see that team in some point as well. And it's just going to require a lot of very careful thought. Like the moment you start doing things like, okay, let's just not invite person X because they would be the only one remote, that exclusion is going to it's going to take root, and people are going to be doing it more and more. So especially when it's hard to include people who are not physically present, I really feel like that's when you should go out of your way to do it. Or this is going to be a problem you cannot get around. Again, this was very easy when everybody was remote, but now that it's a hybrid situation, it's suddenly become massively more difficult. Okay, if that was like some of the overarching issues, then some solutions that I feel apply to these situations. So first of all, you need to understand your culture. So if you have never talked about your culture at your company, please start by doing that. People will have very different definitions of your culture. It does help to define it somewhere, but again, like that book is not going to become a static thing. You should understand it as a snapshot and a single perspective into your culture. In order to be able to define it, you need to measure it. Again, I vouch for pulse surveys. There are other ways. You can have workshops about culture. You can just encourage team leaders to talk about culture, but you need to bring it into discussion, or you will not develop a shared understanding of the company's culture. And again, like I was just saying about the change, always be aware that it's shifting somewhere. Like back when I used to be in production, I was always saying that the plan, the schedule is always about to break. It's always shifting, like in some uncontrolled or undesirable direction. And like as a producer, it's your job to identify like where is that break going to happen, and then get in front of that before it becomes reality. And with culture, it's much the same. It's always changing into some direction, and it's your job as a leader to understand where is it going, and is that a direction you want it to go, or should it be perhaps steered in some other direction? And then culture really starts from the top. You cannot have cultural discussions that are worth anything without your company's top management. Like it really has to come from there. So the way that your top management works with each other more or less becomes the way that your entire company works. Like you can try getting around that, but I'm saying that ultimately you won't succeed. So you really need to start working with the top management and make sure that like anything that you're thinking will apply in the teams, be it ownership or how people are told to do their jobs, how things are planned. All of that flows from the top management, and you need to understand how they work if you're not sitting there yourself. And if you are, start by looking at the way that your own team is behaving, and then expect that the rest of the company will be, after like some degrees of separation, it will be the same. When I started in games in 2008, there was a lot of talk about like game teams always hiring for culture fit. And what they meant at the time was that they wanted to hire people who are like themselves, because presumably you somehow work better with people who are like you. That's not true, like not at all. Yes, you have fewer discussions with people who are not like you, but fewer discussions doesn't mean better games or better work. If you end up with a very homogeneous team, that leads to a very narrow perspective, and you can't do global games from a narrow perspective. It just doesn't work that way. Like you're shutting out the bulk of your potential audience. And the other thing that you get from a very similar staff who are all like very alike each other is that it by definition becomes stagnated. So like when you're hiring, like pay special attention to what people are bringing into your culture. Like what new are they adding? Do they have a new perspective? Do they have a new background, a new skill set, experience level, what have you? So always look for the different, look for value add, something new that is being added to your culture, and understand like in what direction is this going to take your culture. And people are always going to be bringing their own background like with them. You can't stop them from doing so. Like, so just be aware of like what are you adding to the culture, and hire for the ad, not for this so-called fit. I'm seeing that as a very dangerous thing. And then people, when talking about culture things, quite often you're going to run into some resistance from staff. Like they're like maybe tired of like hearing about the culture. To which I say that you cannot over-communicate things that are important to you. So if culture is important to you, you can't over-communicate it. You can't talk about it too much. Yes, if you don't vary your approach, like what exactly are you talking about? Yes, people might, start become too used to it. They start to zone out, and it's not working. And it's probably not a good idea to like be revisiting all of your values every single week or your mission every single week. But most likely, like some part of like that, mission, values, ways of working applies on any given week. So you need to, as a leader, you need to find a way to bring like those important topics into the discussion of the day-to-day at your studio in order to keep fostering them. I think of it as growing plants. So like if you let the mission go without water for too long, people will at some point forget about it, and then it won't apply anymore. So you need to keep these topics alive. And again, pulse surveys, that's what tells me like where are we seeing like a disconnect with like one of these important things. And perhaps it like only applies in a given discipline. Perhaps it only applies with, I don't know, people new to the company, or like only people who have been here for a very long time. And then you need to find a way to engage with those groups and make sure that they're all on board. Finally, some lessons learned. So first of all, when encountering new, like be it a new owner or a new studio that you are bringing on board, or just new people joining your team, new hires, remain curious. So they will have their own ways of working, they will have their own approach to culture, and you should not dismiss it just because it's new. Rather, remain curious and ask yourself like, who are these people? What are they all about? Why do they think this way? And if something just doesn't make sense to you, it's probably a good idea to have a discussion about that. Like, why do you think this way? And always keep it in mind that they are probably great at what they do, or they wouldn't be working with you. So, like, what is the background to like this weird approach that you're now experiencing and wondering what to do about? And similar to encountering new people, also do not reject new ideas. Like we have a tendency to reject the new and try to find a stable ground to stand on. And in this line of work, so creative work for one, creative is always new, and games in general, like the industry is changing so fast, you can't afford to stand still. So like don't even try. Like instead, whenever you encounter something new, be curious about the new thing and see how it might apply. Like what might be the value there for you and your team. And if you're finding that it's scary, or if it's exciting, like stop and ask yourself, like, why is this? Maybe especially if you're finding something that you have a strong reaction against, that usually tells you, or it should tell you, that this is an opportunity to learn something new about the way that you work or the way that you see things. So like, why is this new thing causing so much anxiety for you? Thirdly, do not assume that like your way applies to everybody else. Again, like we have a very strong inclination to think that like the way we work is the correct one. But like if you encounter a new organization, I can guarantee you that they do a lot of the same things that you do in a very different way. And usually they have very good reasons for doing so. And you need to be humble enough and understand that, hey, like this isn't because they're dumb, it's because their background is different, their culture is different, their people are different. And it is your job as a leader to understand why is that, and then see like, okay, like how should this apply to us and our shared way of working? Or if it doesn't, like, okay, how are you going to make up for the difference there? Fourth, you need to listen to everyone. Like talking from a perspective of like being acquired by a much bigger company, my suggestion here would be to like please start with your own staff. So ask them like what are they afraid of, what are they excited about, and then make sure that you understand those topics, those concerns. And in general, also the other side, like even if it feels like they're asking you for dumb things, like maybe stop to consider like why are they doing this? Like again, they are probably very good at what they do, or they would not be talking to you. This is a tough business to be in. So there must be some background to why are they behaving this way. So seek to understand that, and you can only do that by listening. Almost always the issue with communication or like people conflicting is that the expectations are not clear. So like bringing more clarity to the situation is almost always the right solution. So focus on that as a leader. Fifth, know what to fight for. So again, I do not want you to fight against change. Change is good, change is constant, but you do need to understand that there are some things that you want to keep. Like some things in your culture are just key to the way that your studio works. And you need to be aware of those, and then you need to be prepared to fight for them, like when it makes sense. And this doesn't have to be in an acquisition type situation. Like forces within the company are probably threatening like those core parts of your culture if you're not careful. Again, it's shifting in some way at all times, and you need to understand where. And finally, like whenever there's change, it also means that you have an opportunity to change things that may not be working great for you. I can assure you that your corporate culture does have issues. I'm sure it does have some issues. And if you're aware of those issues and you're aware that your culture is always changing, that means that you basically have an opportunity to have an effect on those issues at any given time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joonas. First of all, I want to preface by saying it's super rare to hear such, I'd say, honest reflection on like a long past of like how stages have had different challenges. And just want to say, I really appreciate this. It's not every day that we can actually talk about things with their real names.
Thank you.
And QA time, as usual. Remember the app? It works. So starting with, so how do you personally manage uncertainty?
Through clarity, really. So to stop and consider like why is this thing scary, as I was just saying, and or if it's not me, but like let's say my team is being unclear on things, like stop to ask them like, okay, what is the thing that is like top of mind, like what the issue is here. And more often than not, it's lack of clarity on expectations tends to be the big one, and then you can work to bring clarity there. And if it's yourself, be honest with yourself, like what exactly am I afraid of here? Like people are very generally afraid of making mistakes, and I like to tell them that like this isn't medical science. Like you typically cannot make a mistake that actually has any effect on anybody's life or anything important. Like the very worst case is this, that you're going to lose some time, some money. And like if your bosses have done their jobs, you haven't been given so much responsibility that you could do any real damage with that. If they have, well, that's not really on you. But yeah, that's really it. So like don't be afraid of making mistakes is my number one.
Excellent. Could you give an example of a question in your pulse survey? Maybe a question that you found to be useful producing data.
Yeah, well, very recently we've looked at like a statement. I get useful feedback from my immediate supervisor, and rate that on a scale. And like if as a supervisor you're getting a lot of no, then that tells you quite clearly that you need to be upping your feedback game, which is something that probably everybody needs to do. But and also like the opposite applies. Like I expected our staff to need more help with feedback, and like I'm seeing that for most teams the situation is way better. Like when you're looking at the surveys.
Yeah, and do you measure culture quantitatively, like in this case, numbers on a scale, and you get average and so on, or qualitatively? Or...
Both. So yeah, we use numbers because it helps us identify trends over time. So like because it's the same 40-ish questions rotate throughout the year, you start to see trends that like some things are going up, some are going down, and obviously like my team pays attention to those, and then we brief management on like what the changes are looking like. But at the same time, we do leave room for open comments. Like the platform that we are using, Leap Summit, makes it possible for people to leave fully anonymous comments, and like then we can have a discussion with that employee still anonymously. Like if they don't want to tell who they are, they can do that, and then they can approach us confidentially. And we find that that's very useful. So we often hear of like very difficult HR situations like through these comments.
Yeah, and you mentioned that culture is sort of predominantly trickles down from the top, if you will, or at least that's where change starts. So how do you avoid top-down decision-making when major changes are happening in the company that affect the company culture?
That is really difficult. So like you don't want a situation where like management comes in and tells everybody what to do, except sometimes you do. So again, like unclarity is very dangerous. So in some things, it might make more sense, be the safer option to take a more definite stand on things, that this is how things are going to work on XYZ, and be done with that. But then you need the presence of mind to understand like where you can actually afford some period of uncertainty and let people find their own way, make their own mistakes. Again, it shouldn't be dangerous, and come to solutions that they can actually own. And anything that you dictate from up top is never going to be owned by the teams. And like you need to understand like what are the things that we can afford the teams not to own. And you're going to find that these are very rare.
Now here's a tough one. So toxic cultures always have someone benefiting from the toxicity. How do you handle these people, especially if they're considered vital or unfireable? Which is totally not me, by the way. Absolutely not talking about me.
For sure. In the past, we've had some cases like that. No, you have to get rid of toxic people. Full stop. Like there is no skill set that is worth that. Like I've lost a full team because of a situation like that we didn't act on soon enough because we didn't understand the whole situation. And it took too long to uncover what was going on. But no, like you cannot have that, like full stop. So like the day it becomes known that like there might be a toxic situation somewhere in the company, like my team does get on it, and we try to find out what's going on. Of course, most typically what ends up is that there's a ton of misunderstanding going on. People don't have context, people don't understand each other, and you can bring clarity to that, make people see each other, and then it works out. But when it doesn't, you just need to be decisive. There's no two ways about it.
Fair enough. You mentioned workshops. So how would a workshop about culture look like? So maybe from an audience point of view, what kind of a workshop should they be planning, or any tips?
So if you haven't done like any cultural workshopping, might be a good idea to bring in a trainer, a consultant who's used to doing that sort of thing. But at the same time, you do need to own the work yourselves. So like it cannot be a case where a person X from consultancy Y comes in and helps you define your culture, and then you take that. It's just not going to work. You're going to need to do the bulk of the work on your own. But what things to like start from would be like just talking to your people and like recording the results, and then identifying the teams here, being basic like what is important to people. Like when you ask them like how do we work together, like what are the teams that come up, the teams that come up, and start asking some tough questions. So like what are the things that we are bad at, why? And the one that really works well, I feel, is asking people whether they are comfortable recommending your studio as a place of work for somebody that is important to them. So a family member, a close friend, and if not, why? And then actually, working on those issues.
Good tips. I'll pick one more. All right, let's go with this. So when you encounter a tough change, or for resistance to change. How do you, air quotes, lure people to accept the change, or any other tips and tricks of working the resistance?
No, well, it's always hard. Like people just resist change, full stop, even though it's vital and good for them in the end. They just don't see it that way. It really depends on the situation. Like I don't know, like going way back, like when I started in games, like I had this very difficult tech team who literally wouldn't talk to me because they saw me as an outsider who doesn't know what he's talking about. So they're not going to be taking any direction from me. And it took me a full year to win them over. And basically that just required, building that trust, like one interaction by interaction. But in general, what you want to do is try to get the people involved, get them to own the change. So like present them with like the problem that you have, like okay, I don't know, like here's this big company culture, here's us. How do we bring these things together? And then you need to involve the people. So again, like we went out and asked all of the staff, like what are the things that you're worried about? What are you excited about? And make sure that we then talk about those topics and then try to bring people in as much as we can. So ownership is really what it comes down to.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. Now I believe it's time for lunch. So one more round of applause for Joonas. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll be around for lunch for people to ask follow-up questions for a little bit. So go bother him. Now's your chance.